So guys, you must have seen many games in which Magnus Carlsen is playing like the great Magnus Carlsen. He plays the perfect moves and slowly destroys his opponents. But in today's video, I'll show you two wild Magnus games where he's not playing those engine-like moves, but he's going for strange openings and even blundering at times. Let's see if he can beat top-level grandmasters by playing this way. But before starting off, I would like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Alright, so in the first game, Carlsen is playing as white and he starts with c3. This is a blitz tournament, Magnus is in a fun mood and he has been playing a very weird opening, bringing out his queen this way and then just shuffling his king and queen. That's all he does in his first 4-5 moves against grandmasters. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, his opponent had probably anticipated this, so he straight away played b5. And this is how Magnus reacts.
Wow. Novelty.
So Magnus says, you don't allow me to play queen a4. No worries, I'll bring out my king right in front of you. Stop me if you can. King e3, king d3, king c2. The queen makes way for the boss and ultimately king d1 and Magnus achieves his goal. That is insane level of confidence against a 2700 rated player. At this point, Magnus Carlsen has literally done nothing, whereas his opponent is already advancing with all his pieces in the center. Let's see what happens. We have queen c7, eyeing down the h-pawn, but Magnus doesn't care one bit. Black picks up a free pawn and finally Magnus gets something in the center. Black attacks the queen, so he moves it forward. Again, he threatens the queen. Magnus could have exchanged, but I guess he doesn't want to open up the king, especially since he's behind in development. Therefore, he goes for queen g5, threatening this pawn on g7. Black invites him to take, hoping that he could activate an attack with his rook. But guess what? Magnus doesn't take. Instead, he cuts off the queen from its defense and the bishop seems trapped. He tries moving in, but then the knight attacks with tempo. Now he has no option but to offer an exchange. Magnus accepts the trade and eventually he slides his queen back to g3. Black is still trying to break open the center. Takes, and still Magnus doesn't capture because it makes the king vulnerable to all these different attacks. And remember, he cannot castle because he has already moved his king in the opening. Therefore, he continues to develop. We are seeing some tension building around these pawns and then Magnus decides to attack on the king side. Black pushes on the queen side. He could have probably tried knight a4, but that didn't happen. Anyway, Magnus closes down the center. Again, Black wants to open up the center, but Magnus doesn't exchange. He again locks down the position. Rook d4, the pressure is building on this pawn, so bishop g2 comes to defend. Now Black tries to get in from here, but again, Magnus defends with the rook. Black is closing in. Magnus tries to push him back. Magnus realizes that his king is soon going to come under fire, so he starts running away. Now the other knight jumps into action. The rook also joins in. And just look at this position. It seems as if Black is all set to barge into White's army. But there's actually no way. White is holding up everything so beautifully. These pawns are well defended. The rook can't move. The bishop can't enter in. I guess Black would think of sacrificing his knight to just break open the game. But no. He's frustrated and plays h6, and that's a big mistake. Magnus finds a way to enter Black's weak side. He obviously can't take this because he loses the rook. And if he takes this pawn, White is dominating and this passed pawn becomes very dangerous. Therefore, Black tries to close the position, but Magnus is on the attack. The pawn is now ready to march ahead. The queen is coming to defend. Now suddenly, all the focus has shifted to the king side and Black is clearly on the back foot. The king steps down, the knight jumps in. The queen has to move. If he goes up to stop this pawn, then Magnus can also attack with his queen. So Black decides to come down. Even if there's a check, now he can at least block with the pawn. Anyway, Magnus advances his pawn forward. He's just one step away now from getting another queen. The rook comes to defend. You can't promote here because after takes, Black captures the knight and he has adequate compensation and some deadly attacks on the king. Therefore, Magnus avoids promoting immediately and moves his knight back. This was probably a good opportunity for Black to completely close out this pawn from promoting, but he missed it and he went for the aggressive option to attack the queen. But Magnus doesn't care, he just promotes and after takes, the bishop is gone. Black has only 20 seconds left on the clock. He plays king f8. The knight jumps in, he attacks the queen. We also have a checkmate threat. So Black is forced to give up his rook for the knight. Magnus is up a full piece now. The lonely king tries to save himself, but Magnus is going all in. The rook is ready to attack. Black should not let him through, but he does. Now the rook is unstoppable. We have a checkmate coming, so Black decides to exchange queens. But Magnus says, no, I'm not giving up my queen. It's almost over now for Black. Still, he is fighting. some more knight moves and we have a check. But unfortunately, there is no way to proceed. Magnus sacrifices the bishop and now it's impossible to stop Magnus from here. I mean, the king is completely helpless. So after a few more moves, Black tries to delay the inevitable, but it's just a formality. And ultimately, he resigns because of all these different checkmates. What a game. What a player. And for Magnus, you should definitely hit the like button below this video. Guys, I have one more insane Magnus game to show you, but before that, I would like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Guys, just like an intense chess game, life can also be very stressful. Whenever I am in a stressful or anxious situation, I try to distract myself. But most of the times, your thoughts are not in your control. That's when you need the help of a professional therapist who can take care of your mental health. Finding the right therapist can be a daunting experience, but BetterHelp makes it very easy for you. Well, BetterHelp is an amazing online platform where you can seek therapy at your own convenience. It's online, it's remote, and just by answering a few questions, you get matched to a suitable professional therapist. The best part is that if you don't really get along with that therapist, you can even switch to a new one at no additional cost. So basically, BetterHelp wants to make therapy more affordable and more accessible so that you can start living a happy and healthy life. It's really easy to sign up. All you need to do is go to this link, betterhelp.com/chesstalk. That's better, HELP. And using this link, you'll get 10% off on your first month. Link is in the description box below, so do check it out. Alright, here's another outrageous game where Magnus Carlsen is playing as Black. After knight f6 and d5, we have the Chigorin variation on the board. White brings out his bishop and Magnus attacks the center. White defends and eventually the pawns are exchanged. Bishop g4, bishop e2, and we have another exchange. White castles, we have a few more development moves, and finally Magnus also castles on the king side. The bishops are exchanged and White makes way for his pawns to push on the queen side. Magnus doesn't hold back and he advances as well. White offers a queen exchange, but Magnus strangely doesn't take. And guess what? Magnus blunders his queen. Rook attacks and the queen runs back. As per the engine, Magnus is completely losing this. But can he fight back? Let's see. White is just looking to exchange because he is well ahead in material now. He wants to exchange the rooks as well, but Magnus denies that. Both players have less than 40 seconds on the clock. That's where White blunders. He loses his rook to a knight, but still, White is ahead. Magnus senses the nerves. The pressure is building around this e6 pawn, so Magnus blocks this line and attacks the queen. He moves to f3. Then White makes an exchange sacrifice to break open the center. Now Magnus adds some more defense around this pawn. White realizes that it's going to be very difficult to break through from here, so he moves his queen to a more active square. King h8 and the knight moves out of the way. Magnus again moves the king and White maneuvers his knight. Magnus goes after this pawn, but White is pushing on the king side. The pawn is lost and White continues to advance. Magnus doubles up his rook, so the king looks for shelter. Even though Magnus is down in material, he has slowly but surely started attacking with his limited pieces. The rooks are jumping in. White tries to block, but now we have a fork. White tries to retaliate. He's looking to go after the king. Magnus eliminates the dangerous bishop. White saves the knight and closes down the position to eliminate any further attacks. Now Black is going after this pawn. White tries to fork, but Magnus defends it smartly. The knight moves and Magnus grabs another pawn. He saves the rook and defends this as well. White is running short of time, so he goes for the attack. But the king can be tucked in safely. He tries to get closer and Magnus moves his rook to a much more active square. The knight keeps running and the rook keeps following it. Eventually, Magnus decides to trade off his rook for the knight. He's banking on this pawn advantage to win in the game. The queen is attacked and now Magnus pushes and defends this pawn. He's slowly marching forward with his entire army. White pins the pawn and Magnus unpins it. Now for some reason, White decided to trade off the pawns, but Magnus didn't take and he gifted it away for free. The time pressure is clearly showing on both the players. Now to defend this pawn, he could have given a check like this, but he went for rook f4, completely missing this queen e6 capture. I believe it would have been game over had he taken it because it's just all about giving checks and ultimately the rook is lost. But all that didn't happen. In this position, he just went back. That's what happens when time pressure gets to you. Anyway, Magnus moves forward and after queen e4, king f6, White had another opportunity to attack. But again, he missed it. Instead, he played g4, allowing this pawn to be captured en passant. We are down to 2 pawns versus 1 and White still has the queen. At this moment, both players are just making pre-moves, anticipating what their opponent might play. And look at this. White plunders his queen and he doesn't even take back the rook. Magnus gives him one more chance and finally White takes it. But still, Magnus manages to hold on to a pawn advantage, and after a few more king moves, White runs out of time, and finally, Magnus wins the game. I'm sure you all could relate to this. I mean, making blunders under time pressure, this happens with everyone, even the best. Let me know in the comments some of the biggest blunders you've made in your games that you still can't forget. Alright, so it's puzzle time. In this position, it is White's turn and you need to find the best move for White. Share your answers in the comments and let's see how many of you get this right. Guys, do subscribe to the channel and I shall see you in the next one.